He was just a retired police dog, until the day she was threatened. In the quiet town of Glendale, people knew Ash as the gentle giant, the retired police dog who walked beside a little girl in a wheelchair, never straying more than a few feet from her side. Most thought it was just companionship. They didn't know he'd once pulled a wounded soldier from gunfire. They didn't know he'd been trained by the girl's father, who died before he could teach Clara how to ride a bike, and they definitely didn't know Ash was still on duty. Until the morning Jonas Ward stepped inside the cafe. One slap of a chair, one too close stare, and Ash was on his feet, body between Clara and danger muscles tense, eyes locked, waiting. That moment was the spark. What followed would tear open old wounds, summon ghosts from the battlefield, and lead a broken man and a fragile child down a path of redemption, guided by a dog who never forgot his purpose. The morning sun filtered gently through the lace curtains of the Maple and Oak Cafe, casting honeyed light across checkered floors and mismatched wooden tables. It was the kind of small-town cafe where the air always smelled like cinnamon and brewed stories. The bell above the door jingled, a soft chime that made regulars instinctively glance up and smile. Clara Rivers wheeled herself over the threshold, her hands nimble on the push rims. She wore a navy hoodie with a faded constellation print and a pink butterfly barrette clipped into her windswept hair. Her gaze darted across the room, curious, measuring, bright. Behind her came Evelyn Rivers, poised in a way only women who've had to rebuild their lives from ashes could be. Her hand rested lightly on Clara's shoulder before shifting to her handbag, always attentive but never overbearing. And flanking them both, padding in with effortless composure, was Ash. Ash was a German shepherd of impressive stature and quiet presence. He moved like water-controlled, smooth, alert. The harness across his back bore the words, "Service Dog. Do not distract." But that never stopped the regulars from giving a reverent nod or an admiring glance. Ash didn't react to any of it. His focus never left Clara. "Morning, Clara," came a voice from behind the pastry counter. It was Julia, the young waitress with sunflower tattoos on her forearms. She wore an apron dusted with flour and a smile reserved only for their favorite patron. "We saved your spot," she said, gesturing to the corner window table, the one with the low-hanging fern and the handmade cushion Clara had once helped pick out. Clara grinned. "Thanks, Julia. Ash says hi, too." The waitress chuckled and gave a two-finger salute to the dog, who met her eyes with a steady glance before returning to his scanning mode. Ash never wagged in public, never whimpered, but Clara always said he smiled differently. As they settled into the space, Evelyn carefully pushed Clara's chair into position. She removed the folded plaid blanket from her bag and laid it across Clara's legs. Not because it was cold, it was 70 degrees and sunny outside, but because the circulation in Clara's lower limbs hadn't worked properly since the crash. Small routines, small battles. "I think we'll have the usual," Evelyn said. Julia nodded and disappeared into the kitchen. Clara glanced out the window, her eyes lingering on the wind playing in the sycamore leaves. Across the street, a man helped his toddler climb onto a scooter. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, sharp, playful. Ash's ears twitched, but he stayed put, his body still as stone beside Clara's wheelchair. He never left her side, not even when she slept. As Evelyn pulled out her tablet and began answering emails, her expression subtly tense in that way Clara had learned to recognize. Clara's hands moved to Ash's fur, combing through the dense, warm strands behind his neck. It was a grounding habit, a quiet ritual. "Do you think dogs ever get tired of being good?" she asked suddenly. Evelyn looked up. "What makes you ask that?" Clara shrugged. "Ash never breaks rules. Never chases squirrels, never barks unless I'm in trouble. I just wonder if it's hard always being in charge." Evelyn blinked, her lips parting as if unsure how to answer. Clara's mind often leapt into places most children hadn't yet discovered, places filled with empathy and grief and wonder all braided together. "I think Ash likes having a job," Evelyn finally said. "It gives him purpose, just like how your drawings give you purpose." Clara nodded solemnly, though her gaze lingered on Ash's steady frame. His eyes swept the cafe with military precision, soft brown, but never soft in focus. And then, for a brief moment, he turned to look at Clara. Really look. As if to say, "You're my job, but you're also my home." Julia returned with their drinks, a decaf latte for Evelyn, and a cup of hot cocoa topped with a single marshmallow star for Clara. "I added cinnamon," Julia whispered like it was a secret. "It's luckier that way." Clara beamed. "Everything's better with cinnamon." Their plate of blueberry scones arrived soon after, still warm, steam curling like a whispered story from their golden crusts. Clara took a small bite, then placed a piece on a napkin and offered it to Ash, who sniffed it politely before turning away. "He never eats during shift," Clara explained, mimicking her father's voice. "Too professional." The laughter that followed was soft and warm, but somewhere under the table, Evelyn's hand gripped the edge of her skirt. Just for a second. Just long enough for grief to rise like an undertow, then vanish. Her brother Caleb used to say those exact words. He was the one who trained Ash, the one who insisted Ash would protect Clara no matter what, the one who never made it back from that last mission. Evelyn sipped her coffee. Outside, clouds began to gather quietly at the horizon. Subtle. Ominous. And inside the cafe, Ash's head tilted ever so slightly toward the door. Nothing dramatic. Nothing alarming. Just aware. Because somewhere beyond the cafe windows, a man was walking toward the entrance. A man with shoulders that hung too heavy for morning sun. A man who hadn't seen Ash in 6 years. But Ash? Ash remembered everything. The scone crumbs were still warm on the plate, but Clara had already lost interest in breakfast. Her fingers, small but purposeful, fished a folded paper from the pocket of her hoodie, careful, as if it were something fragile, alive. With slow deliberation, she unfolded it across the cafe table, smoothing the creases like she'd done 100 times before. It was a drawing, colored pencil, slightly smudged. A butterfly. Its wings were wide and uneven. The right one flared just a bit too much. The body was shaded dark purple, surrounded by specks of yellow. But there was a gentleness in it, something quiet and sincere. The kind of imperfection only a child's hand, guided by grief, could make beautiful. Evelyn glanced up from her planner, her glasses perched low on her nose, her attention briefly drawn from the pillbox she was organizing into the open shape of Clara's sadness. "That's your monarch?" she asked softly. Clara nodded but didn't look up. "The last one we saw was in September. Daddy said they don't stay long, but they always find their way back." She traced one wing with the edge of her nail. "I wonder if they know where they're going, or if they just hope the wind remembers for them." Evelyn's chest tightened. Clara had a way of saying things that didn't feel like they came from a 6-year-old. Her grief hadn't made her smaller. It had made her sharper, quieter, more observant. She asked fewer questions these days, but when she did, they cut to the bone. "Maybe both," Evelyn said after a pause. "Maybe they carry a little memory in their wings, like Ash does." At the sound of his name, The German shepherd lifted his head slightly, ears twitching toward the front of the cafe. He hadn't moved from his spot beside Clara's chair, but something in his posture shifted, barely perceptible. A twitch in the shoulder, a soft intake of breath. Clara noticed instantly. "He's listening," she murmured. Evelyn followed her gaze. The cafe was calm. Background noise hummed along, a hiss of steam from the espresso machine, silverware clinking, the low murmur of conversations. But Ash wasn't reacting to sound. Not exactly. He was reading the room the way only working dogs could, nose tilted slightly, eyes sweeping, not for threats, but changes. Human changes. The shift in energy that couldn't be heard, only felt. "He does that when someone's lying," Clara said, without taking her eyes off him. "Lying?" Clara nodded slowly. "When he was with Daddy at the station, he could always tell. Daddy said Ash had a nose for things people were too scared to say out loud." Evelyn looked at her niece. There was no mischief in Clara's voice, no exaggeration, just observation. Calm, certain. Clara turned back to her drawing and lifted it gently toward Ash. "I showed him this the day we finished it. He sniffed the paper for a long time. Then he lay down and stayed really still." She smiled faintly. "I think he remembered Daddy through it." Evelyn swallowed hard, then returned to the pill organizer in front of her, trying to keep her hands steady. The little compartments clicked open one by one. Morning meds, midday dose, emergency tabs, and the new capsules prescribed to help ease Clara's phantom pain. "You'll need to take the blue one after lunch," Evelyn said, trying to sound normal. Clara's eyes didn't move from the butterfly. "It makes my head cloudy." "I know. Daddy never liked medicine that made him fuzzy," Clara said. Evelyn paused. "He didn't?" Silence lingered. Ash shifted his weight, head still raised. His tail stayed motionless. Then Clara whispered, almost like a prayer, "If I close my eyes and hold real still, I can remember how his jacket smelled." Evelyn didn't speak. She just reached across the table and covered Clara's hand with her own. They sat like that for a while, girl, guardian, and dog, in a quiet corner of a cafe that had grown used to their silence. Outside, a soft breeze stirred the tree branches. The clouds had thickened just enough to change the light inside to something more amber, more introspective. Ash's ears twitched again. Clara noticed. Her hand tightened around the drawing. "He smells something," she whispered. Evelyn frowned. "Who?" Clara didn't answer at first. Then her voice came out quiet, distant. "Someone with war in their coat." And just as she said it, the cafe door opened with a gentle chime. The next scene had begun. The bell over the cafe door chimed again, but this time it wasn't the soft jingle of a regular or the lazy swing of a sleepy town morning. This one came with weight, with intention, like the door had been opened by a storm that hadn't yet made landfall. 3 men stepped in. The first to cross the threshold wore a weathered leather jacket, the kind dulled not just by age, but by life. His boots were heavy, leaving mud smudges with every step, and a faded military patch clung stubbornly to his left shoulder, half peeled but unmistakable. His hair was close-cropped, gray creeping in near the temples. But it wasn't his clothes or gait that made the cafe quiet a notch. It was his eyes like old winter, unforgiving, restless. Burned out and burning all at once. The 2 men who followed him were loud in the way people often are when they're afraid of being invisible. Tattoos peeked from sleeves. One had a chain wallet that clinked with every step, but the leader, The man in the front walked like someone who didn't need noise to be noticed. Clara stopped mid-sentence. The straw of her hot cocoa rested between her lips, but she didn't sip. She just stared. Ash rose quietly, smoothly. No bark, no growl. His body pressed gently but firmly against the side of Clara's wheelchair. The hair along his spine didn't stand, but the tension in his shoulders told Evelyn everything she needed to know. He was reading the air. Across the room, the man in the leather jacket slowed his pace. He hadn't even glanced in their direction, not at first. But as he crossed behind the bakery display, Ash didn't take his eyes off him. And then something shifted. The man stopped. His gaze landed on Ash. It didn't just land. It locked. A flicker. A freeze. Something behind his face broke formation. Jonas Ward hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected to see a German shepherd with that gait, that posture, that harness. He hadn't expected to be yanked mid-step back into a memory that reeked of sand and diesel and blood-soaked camo. But here it was, alive, breathing. Ash didn't move, but something inside him stirred. Their eyes met, handler and hound, separated by years, war and loss. And in that instant, the noise of the cafe faded. Cups clinking, keyboards tapping, casual laughter, it all receded into the background hum of something ancient and buried, clawing its way to the surface. Jonas didn't speak. Clara noticed. "Evelyn," she said quietly, not looking away from him. "That man's face just changed." Evelyn glanced up from her planner, brow tightening. "What do you mean?" Clara didn't blink. "He looked like he remembered something he didn't want to." Jonas turned away. He didn't walk toward them. He didn't speak. He just found a corner table near the far window angle to keep his back against the wall. Old habit. One of many. His companions laughed about something as they slid into the booth beside him, oblivious to the slow-motion collapse happening behind his eyes. Ash's body lowered back into a sit, but his head remained turned watching. Not hostile. Not relaxed. Simply aware. That hyper-specific, razor-edged awareness of a dog who remembered every face that once meant life or death. Jonas picked up the menu but didn't read it. His fingers drummed lightly against the Formica tabletop, his eyes flickering back to Ash and the girl beside him. A girl with Caleb Rivers' eyes. Jonas hadn't known she existed, but he recognized something anyway. Clara slowly turned back to her cocoa, though her gaze stayed peripheral, lingering on the man in the corner. Her hand moved to Ash's neck, fingers curling gently into the fur behind his ear. "He knows, Ash," she whispered, barely audible. Evelyn stiffened. "What?" Clara nodded. "Not like people know dogs. Like he knew him before." "Clara, I'm not guessing," she added. Ash made no sound, but his body was an antenna. He didn't flinch. He didn't shift. He just watched. At the back of the cafe, Jonas murmured something to the waitress. "Just coffee, black." His voice was gravel over ice rough, low, restrained, not meant for making friends. The waitress nodded, uneasy, and moved quickly to fulfill the order. He still hadn't said a word to Clara or Ash. But he didn't need to. The memory of a bond can echo louder than the bond itself. And somewhere, deep in Ash's chest beneath the years of service, the scars no one could see, the training layered like armor over instinct, something stirred. Recognition. But not trust. Not yet. Jonas stared out the window, eyes squinting at nothing in particular, a man with one foot in the present and the other dragging chains through the past. Clara reached into her lap and touched her butterfly drawing, folded it carefully, then placed it in her bag. Evelyn watched her, confused. "Why are you putting it away?" Clara didn't answer at first. Then she said softly, "Because butterflies know when the air shifts." Even before the storm, the coffee at Jonas Ward's table had gone cold. He hadn't touched it. He just sat there, staring into it like it might whisper back an answer he wasn't brave enough to ask aloud. His two companions, Mac and Ellis, were mid-laugh over some crass joke about old times and worse women, but Jonas didn't hear them. Not really. His attention hadn't left the corner table, not for more than a blink. The girl, the dog, the feeling clawing inside his chest like something caged too long. Ash. He hadn't spoken the name aloud yet, but it was there, scratching behind his teeth like a memory you taste before you see. His palms itched. The scar under his right wrist, a relic from Kandahar, burned faintly, the way it did when storms were coming. He needed to know. He needed to get close. "Don't," Ellis muttered under his breath, following Jonas's gaze. "You look like you're about to interrogate a kid." Jonas stood anyway. "Just a dog," he said, but even his voice didn't believe it. He walked with deliberate ease, shoulders rolled back, face blank, the kind of neutral expression that veterans learn to wear when they're trying to pass through civilian spaces without setting off alarm bells. But Ash had already clocked him. The moment Jonas moved, Ash's posture adjusted, still seated, still silent, but braced. Every muscle under that thick fur said, "I see you." Jonas stopped beside their table. Evelyn had gone to the restroom. It was just Clara, her butterfly hoodie slightly bunched around her elbows, and Ash, now sitting with his body positioned squarely between her and the approaching man. "Nice dog," Jonas said, voice low, rough. Clara looked up, wary but polite. "Thank you. What's his name?" She hesitated. Her eyes flicked to Ash, then back to the man towering over her. "Ash." Jonas nodded, jaw tightening slightly. "I knew a dog like him once," he said. "Back in the desert." Ash didn't blink. Jonas crouched a little, getting closer to the dog's eye level. Clara's hands tightened around her cocoa cup. "Please don't touch him. He's working." Jonas held up both hands in mock surrender. No touching, just looking. Then he did something subtle but intentional. He snapped his fingers. Loud, sharp, close. Ash didn't flinch, but he did lean just slightly forward, enough that Clara's wheelchair rocked back half an inch. "Solid reaction," Jonas muttered, more to himself than to her. He shifted his weight, hands on his knees now. "You train him yourself?" Clara's voice was steady. "He was trained by my dad." "Your dad, huh?" Jonas looked up, finally meeting Clara's eyes. And for a split second something cracked in his. Recognition. Regret. But then it was gone, swallowed under that blank slate stare again. Jonas reached into his pocket, pulled out a coin, and let it fall from his fingers with a metallic clink right beside Ash. Ash didn't move, didn't even look. His gaze stayed on Jonas, body coiled like a spring that had learned how to breathe. "Impressive," Jonas said softly. "Not many dogs keep it together when there's noise and motion." "You're making him nervous," Clara said gently. Jonas leaned back just a little. "Am I?" "Yes," she said. "And me too." It wasn't said with anger, just truth. Unflinching, childlike and yet ancient in the way grief makes children older than they should be. Jonas stood up slowly. Ash's head lifted to follow. "Good boy," Jonas murmured, half under his breath. Clara's voice followed him like a thread. "Did you know my dad?" Jonas paused, a breath, a blink, then turned back just enough to say, "Not like I should have." And he walked away, back to his table, where the laughter had stopped, and both his companions now watched him with silent caution. Ash finally exhaled, a slow, controlled breath. His body relaxed by degrees, but his eyes never left the man in the corner. Clara reached down, brushing her fingers across Ash's back. "You're still his dog," she whispered, "but you're mine now." Jonas Ward sat at the edge of his motel bed that night, elbows on knees, breath shallow, shirt damp with sweat, though the AC whirred steadily from the wall. The lights were off, the shadows didn't move, but the battlefield behind his eyelids never did stop burning. It started the same way it always did. Heat, then sand, then Weaver's scream, Kandahar, 5 years ago. It was supposed to be routine check a compound on the outer perimeter, confirm evac routes for civilians. But Weaver's little brother, Mason, didn't like routines. Eager, young, barely 19, still wearing the grin of someone who hadn't learned that war doesn't care how brave you are. "Clear right! Copy moving." Then that sound. A pop, not loud, but wrong. Jonas turned just in time to see Mason step down onto nothing. The ground lifted, a breath stolen by fire, a heartbeat smothered in dirt. Everything after that became a blur of yelling, ash, and that horrible ringing in his ears. He remembered Caleb's arm pinning him down, screaming orders. He remembered sand packed in his teeth. He remembered Weaver cradling his brother's body and begging the dust not to take him. It took him anyway. Jonas blinked. Back in the dark motel room, his fingers trembled. He clenched them into fists. His boots were still on. He didn't even remember sitting down. He reached for the bottle near the lamp but stopped short. Alcohol wouldn't fix this. It hadn't for 5 years. The guilt was a snake that coiled quieter when drunk, but never left. He sat back and let the night come, and with it, another memory. 2 weeks later, a refugee checkpoint. It was blistering hot. Caleb had stopped for water when he heard it, the faintest whimper from behind a rusted oil drum. Jonas was too tired to care, but Caleb had always had that sense, that radar for things left behind. Ash had been just a pup then, barely weaned, ribs showing, right paw bleeding from stepping on wire, one eye crusted shut. But when Caleb leaned down, the pup didn't growl, didn't cower. He stood up, wobbled, but stood. "That's a damn fighter," Caleb said, lifting him gently. Jonas had grumbled something cynical. Just a mouth to feed. But Ash had curled in the crook of Caleb's elbow and stared straight at Jonas with that same unblinking stare he'd given him today at the cafe. Silent. Seeing. Knowing. Caleb named him that night. "Ash," he said, "'cause sometimes what's left after fire is what saves you." Jonas pressed his palms into his eyes. "I didn't save anyone," he whispered. He leaned forward and pressed his forehead to the back of his hands. Ash had always been more than a dog. He was the quiet between gunfire, the breath after panic, the one thing that didn't leave when blood pooled in dirt, or when the letters home never came back. He remembered the way Ash stayed beside Weaver when they told him about Mason. Just sat there, solid, still, letting Weaver scream until his throat gave out. Jonas never forgot that. Or the way Ash later sat beside him, silent witness to guilt too thick to confess. Back in the present, Jonas stared at the ceiling. Today, across a cafe floor and 5 years of mistakes, he'd seen that dog again. Older, steadier, but unmistakable. Ash. And beside him, her. The girl. Caleb's daughter. She had Caleb's eyes, the same kind that didn't blink even when life threw shrapnel at you. That girl had looked at him like she saw the crack inside, like she knew. And Ash hadn't barked, hadn't moved. But his stillness had been more cutting than a growl. Jonas let the silence hold him for a moment longer, then whispered to the dark, "I should have died out there." There was no answer, only memory, only fire, only that name Caleb left behind like a lifeline. Ash, a dog, a reminder, a ghost, and somehow still here. The next Wednesday, the sky over Haven Ridge was overcast. Low-hanging clouds curled around the rooftops like wool soaked in gray. Inside the Maple and Oak Cafe, the familiar clatter of ceramic cups and soft jazz hummed in the background routine. Comforting. Clara sat by the window, tracing the outline of a butterfly on her napkin. Ash lay at her feet, unmoving but not asleep, his ears ever so slightly twitching with the vibrations of each approaching step. Evelyn had stepped outside to take a call from the pharmacy. Clara glanced at Ash. He hadn't blinked in nearly a minute. And then the door opened. Again. Jonas Ward stepped in, but this time he didn't drift quietly to the corner table. This time his gait was uneven, his face ruddy with either rage or something fermented. His jacket hung off one shoulder, and the look in his eyes, distant, glassy, didn't belong in any cafe. The 2 men he'd come with before weren't with him. He walked straight toward Clara's table. Ash rose in one fluid motion. Clara dropped her napkin. "Easy, Ash," she said softly, hand hovering near his shoulder. Jonas halted about a foot away. He's the dog," Jonas muttered, voice scratchy, volume too high for the quiet space. "He's not just any mutt. He was ours." Several heads turned. The barista stopped mid-pour. A spoon clinked too loudly into a saucer. Someone by the counter slowly raised a phone, thumb hovering near record. "Sir, maybe you should sit," offered the waitress from across the room. But Jonas waved her off, swaying slightly. No, I trained that dog. You think she knows that? You think she knows what he's done?" He pointed at Ash with a trembling finger. Ash didn't growl, didn't bark. He simply stepped forward, placing himself fully between Clara and the man. Clara's voice, though soft, cut through the space. "Please leave us alone." Jonas laughed, a cracked, bitter sound. "You don't know who I am, do you?" Clara shook her head. "No, but he does." And Ash took another step forward, gaze locked, ears pinned. "Jonas, stop," the waitress warned again. But he wasn't hearing her. He was unraveling threads pulled too tight for too long. He reached out, not at Clara, but at the chair next to her, and slapped it backward. It toppled with a loud crash. Gasps echoed. The phone across the room started recording. Someone stood near the counter, ready to intervene. Ash surged forward but didn't lunge. He planted his paws wide, pressed his side gently into Clara's leg, and stared Jonas down with a steady, breathless stillness. Back, Clara whispered to Ash. The dog obeyed, just one step, but the message was clear. You're done here. And then the door opened again. Evelyn stepped in, eyes widening instantly at the sight of Jonas standing over her niece. Hey! Her voice was sharp, the kind that could snap bone if needed. Step away from her. Jonas's head turned slowly. He looked at Evelyn, then at the room at the phones, the stairs, the judgment. His chest rose once, hard. I didn't come to hurt her, he said, almost to himself. I came to say something. But whatever it was, it had already fallen apart. Evelyn moved swiftly to Clara's side. Go, she told Jonas, before I make you. He hesitated, then turned and walked out into the thick gray air. Silence settled hard. The chair lay on its side. A spoon spun lazily on the ground nearby. The cafe had stopped pretending to sip coffee. All eyes were on Clara. She looked down at Ash, who was now seated again, calm, composed, but watching the door. He's not just mad, Clara whispered to no one in particular. He's broken. And Ash, faithful, scarred, sentinel. Ash rested his head gently on her foot. The house was quiet that evening, quieter than usual. Rain tapped at the window panes like hesitant fingers, the kind that didn't mean a storm, but carried a weight all the same. Clara had gone to bed early, curled up with a book and Ash beside her, his breathing steady and rhythmic like waves lapping ashore. Evelyn sat alone in Caleb's old study. It wasn't really a study anymore, just a room that held what remained of him. Framed certificates dulled by time, a faded photo of 3 soldiers and a dog, all standing in the thick dust of some foreign desert. A paperweight in the shape of an eagle, chipped at the wing, and the desk, sturdy, heavy, the kind they didn't make anymore. She hadn't touched it since the accident. Tonight, though, something made her reach for the drawer, not out of nostalgia, not even grief, maybe necessity. The past had been stirring too loudly lately to ignore. The drawer creaked when she opened it. Inside, neat as always, were Caleb's things. A worn notepad, several dog training manuals, an old badge tucked into a leather wallet. And then a single unsealed envelope. No postage, no address sticker, but one name, written in Caleb's steady block letters, Jonas Ward. Evelyn's breath caught. She hesitated, a long beat, then slowly pulled the letter out. It wasn't typed. Caleb hated keyboards. His writing was slanted, precise, just the way he spoke. Calm, deliberate, honest. She unfolded it and began to read. Jonas, if you're reading this, it means I didn't get to send it. Or maybe I chickened out. I've been thinking a lot about Kandahar, about Mason, about Weaver, and about you. We all made it back, but not really, right? Some of us made it in body, but I don't think your soul ever left that day. I saw it in your eyes after the explosion, like you were still there, buried under that sand with him. I should have said this sooner. You didn't kill Mason. War did. You were a good soldier, Jonas, and a better friend than I deserved. And Ash? He wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. Don't think I forgot that. You were the first to patch his paw. You were the one who made him sit for the first time. You always said he listened better than any of us. Listen, I know Weaver's still out there. I've heard the rumors what he's become. I fear he's holding on to something darker than grief. And if anything ever happens to me, I worry he might look for something to blame, or someone that someone might be Clara. She's strong, smarter than me, has a heart like her mom, but she's still just a kid. And if I'm gone, I need someone to watch her back. That someone should have been you. I'm sorry for the silence, for the time lost, for not being there when you needed a hand. I'm asking you now, not as a soldier, not as a trainer, but as a brother. Come back, forgive yourself, and if you can, protect my girl. Caleb. The paper trembled in Evelyn's hands. She pressed it against her chest, unable to stop the tears that spilled hot, fast, and almost furious. So much had gone unsaid between the two men, so many years wasted, and now, with everything stirring Jonas, the outburst, Weaver's name floating in shadow again, this letter felt less like a message and more like a warning carried through time. She looked toward the hallway, toward Clara's room, where the girl slept with trust so absolute it pierced Evelyn's heart. The weight of guardianship pressed heavier tonight, but Caleb's voice, inked in blue across old paper, somehow lightened the burden. She folded the letter again, slower this time, and placed it back into the envelope, though now it seemed far too late to mail. Instead, she held it against her palm. Tomorrow she would tell Clara, but tonight she let the silence answer. The storm passed sometime after midnight. Morning crept in slowly, pressing a soft gray glow through the curtains. The air in the house smelled of warm blankets and leftover rain. In the kitchen, a kettle whistled gently. Evelyn's way of grounding herself, one cup of tea at a time. Clara sat at the table, still in her pajamas, legs tucked beneath her on the wooden chair. Ash lay nearby, stretched out on the tiled floor, his head resting over one paw. He wasn't asleep, not fully. His ears flicked every so often, always listening. Evelyn placed a mug in front of Clara. Chamomile with a little honey, just the way she liked it. But Clara didn't reach for it. She was staring at Ash, or more precisely, remembering something. "Why did he look at Ash like that?" she asked, voice light but loaded. "The man, Jonas." Evelyn stirred her own tea slowly. "You noticed?" Clara nodded. "He didn't look like he was afraid, or mad, just like he knew him." Evelyn sat down, folding her hands around the mug. "That's because he did." Clara blinked. "What?" Evelyn exhaled through her nose. She hadn't planned to have this conversation yet. Not now. Not like this. But Clara, with her quiet wisdom and persistent heart, always pulled truths out like loose threads. "Your dad and Jonas, they served together," Evelyn said, "in Afghanistan, a long time ago." Clara's brows drew together. "Was Jonas a soldier too?" "He was. And not just that, he and Caleb trained dogs, just like Ash." Clara's eyes dropped to the German shepherd, who now looked up, blinking slow, sensing the shift in tone. Evelyn continued, her voice dipping lower. "They found Ash overseas, when he was still a pup. Stray, barely alive. It was Jonas who patched him up. Your father, well, he saw something in him. Said Ash didn't just survive. He chose to." Clara looked stunned. "Ash came from them?" "Yes. Both of them raised him, trained him, loved him." Evelyn smiled sadly. "He was their partner, their protector, but mostly their friend." Clara sat quietly for a moment, letting the pieces arrange themselves. "Then why did Jonas look so lost?" Evelyn hesitated. Things happened over there. Hard things. Caleb tried to stay in touch. He even wrote Jonas letters. But something must have broken between them. Clara's voice dropped. Did Daddy forgive him? Evelyn didn't answer right away. She glanced down at her tea, then across the counter, where last night's envelope sat. Still sealed now. Still sacred. I think he tried, Evelyn finally said. I think he wanted to. Clara's fingers traced the rim of her mug. Was Jonas supposed to be part of our family? That question hit harder than Evelyn expected. She swallowed. I don't know, sweetheart, she said. But I think if life had gone differently, maybe yes. Clara reached down, brushing her hand over Ash's head. The dog shifted, nudging her wrist with his nose. It wasn't a demand. It was a gesture. Quiet and knowing, like he remembered it all, too. Do you think he still loves Ash? Clara asked. Evelyn paused, then nodded. Yes. I think that's why it hurt so much to see him again. Clara looked up, eyes thoughtful beyond her years. Then maybe Ash can help him come back. Come back from where? Clara answered without looking up. Wherever he got stuck. Outside, the clouds began to part, just enough to let one sliver of light stretch across the floorboards. Ash closed his eyes and let out a low, contented sigh. The house had settled into silence, but Evelyn couldn't sleep. She stood at the doorway of Clara's room, one hand gripping the edge of the frame like it anchored her to something solid. The other hand pressed a mug of untouched tea to her chest, lukewarm by now, the kind of comfort that had cooled before it could serve its purpose. Clara was fast asleep, her breathing soft and even, one arm curled under her cheek. Her butterfly sketch, the one she'd made just days ago for Caleb's birthday, even though he wasn't here, was pinned neatly to the corkboard above her bed. A splash of yellow and blue among the soft pastels of the room. Ash lay curled near the edge of the bed, alert despite his stillness. His head rested on his paws, but his eyes followed Evelyn. He hadn't moved in hours, and yet his presence filled the room more than any light ever could. A silent sentinel, the last piece of Caleb's world that hadn't faded. Evelyn whispered to the dark, as if afraid to wake the ghost that lingered. He still watches her like it's his only job, she said. Still listens like you're going to walk through the door and tell him to stand down. Ash didn't respond, but his ears twitched, like he'd heard Caleb's name spoken in that hush. Evelyn lingered a few moments longer. Then she turned and walked quietly down the hallway, the floorboards creaking beneath her bare feet. She didn't sleep that night. Not really. She sat in the kitchen with the letter beside her and the ticking of the old wall clock carving out time she didn't know what to do with. And when dawn painted the windows in shades of soft gray, she finally picked up the phone. The hold music at the police department was predictably dull, somewhere between elevator jazz and a lullaby. Evelyn rubbed at her temple as she waited, the receiver tucked between shoulder and chin, her other hand absently tracing the wood grain of the table. "Riverside Police. This is Officer Park," a voice finally came through. "Hi, this is Evelyn Hartwell. I'm calling about an incident yesterday morning at Maple and Oak Cafe. A man Jonas Ward was acting, unstable. I'd like to file a report if I still can." There was a pause. "Actually, ma'am, Jonas Ward turned himself in last night." Evelyn blinked. "He what?" "Came in voluntarily around 11:30 p.m. Said he caused a disturbance. Cooperated fully. Didn't resist anything, just said he owed someone the truth. He's with us now. You were mentioned in the incident notes." Evelyn sat back, a wave of something unnameable washing over her. Relief, confusion, a trace of worry. "Did he say why?" she asked. The officer hesitated. "No details, ma'am. Just that he wasn't proud of what happened and wanted to make things right." Evelyn swallowed hard. Her eyes drifted to the hall where Clara still slept, her world wrapped in innocence and routine. But that world had tilted, slightly, subtly, enough for the grown-ups to feel the shift in their bones. She ended the call, hung up slowly, then reached for the letter again. Caleb had written of forgiveness, of trust, of asking Jonas to come back if he could. And now, maybe he had. Evelyn folded the letter along its original crease and placed it gently inside a small drawer in the kitchen hutch. Not out of sight, but not out in the open either. Some truths needed time. Some promises, a second chance. And in the other room, the German shepherd still lay beside the little girl's bed, unmoving, watching, always watching. The police station on Main Street still had that old brick smell like damp paperwork, steel, and long nights. Clara held tightly onto Evelyn's hand as they stepped through the glass doors. Her wheelchair wheels hummed quietly across the linoleum floor, each rotation a steady rhythm that seemed to echo through the hushed corridors. The waiting room was near empty, save for a vending machine humming to itself, and a sleepy officer filling out reports behind the desk. Captain Reyes stood up from his office when he saw them. Middle-aged, sharp-eyed, with a voice that carried weight not because it was loud, but because it rarely wasted words. "Mrs. Hartwell, Clara," he greeted with a warm nod. "He's been cooperative. Said he wanted to speak, especially to the little one." Clara looked up. "Is Ash allowed inside?" Reyes smiled faintly. "He's welcome. You too, young lady." The room they were led into was small, an interview room technically, but today it felt more like neutral ground. The windows were frosted. A single table sat in the middle. No cuffs, no drama. Jonas was already there. He looked different, less wild, more weathered, like a man still hung over from memory, not alcohol. His jacket hung loose around his shoulders. His hands rested on the table, fingers laced. But when Clara entered, he stood, immediately, respectfully. "Hey," he said, his voice gravel and regret. "I'm glad you came." Evelyn didn't respond at first. Her body was stiff, protective. Ash, by contrast, walked in slowly and stopped at Clara's side, sitting tall, eyes locked on Jonas. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Clara rolled forward, quietly, deliberately. She looked up at Jonas, her voice calm but curious. "Did you train Ash with my dad?" Jonas looked like he'd been hit with a memory so vivid it hurt. He dropped to a crouch to meet her eye level, voice trembling. Yeah, I did." A pause. He looked at Ash. "I was there the day we found him," Jonas said, his voice cracking at the edges. "He was just a scared little thing, hiding behind a burned-out truck. Your dad, Caleb, he didn't hesitate. He whistled once, and that pup crawled right into his arms. We named him Ash because his paws were covered in soot." Clara reached out gently, touching Ash's collar. Jonas swallowed hard. "Your father was the bravest man I've ever known. He taught me everything good I ever did, and I let him down. I disappeared when I should have stayed." His eyes glassed over. His breath hitched. "I'm sorry I scared you at the cafe," he added. "That wasn't me. Or maybe it was the worst part of me. I've lived with ghosts for too long. But seeing you, seeing him," he nodded toward Ash, "it was like Caleb walked back into the room, Clara didn't flinch. She simply looked at him, thoughtful, then said softly, "I think Ash remembers you." Jonas exhaled like that truth broke him open. "I don't deserve that," he whispered. Ash, as if on cue, moved forward just one step. It was subtle, but it was enough. Jonas looked down. His hands were shaking. He brought them to his face, and for the first time in years, he let himself cry. Not loud, not messy, just quietly, painfully. The kind of cry you only hear from people who've held everything in for far too long. Evelyn stepped forward, unsure. But when she saw Clara gently place a hand on Jonas's arm, she said nothing, because in that moment something unspoken passed between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a beginning. The interview room had grown still again. Captain Reyes had stepped out, leaving Jonas, Clara, Evelyn, and Ash alone in a quiet pocket of fluorescent-lit truth. Jonas sat back in the chair, no longer weeping, but not collected either. He looked like a man building up the courage to tell someone there's a storm coming, and it's already too close. Clara stayed beside Ash, stroking the fur behind his ears. Ash hadn't moved in the last few minutes, eyes steady on Jonas, body calm, but ready. Jonas finally broke the silence. "I didn't just come here to say sorry." Evelyn crossed her arms. "Then say what you came to say." He nodded, eyes flickering toward Clara, then down to his shaking hands. "There's a man," Jonas began. "Name's Weaver. He was in our unit. His brother. His name was Mitchell. He died during a recon op. Desert Border 2009. Jonas's voice tightened like each word dragged barbed wire across his throat. "Caleb and I were leading the squad. We walked into an IED trap. Caleb pulled Ash clear. I made it out too. Mitchell didn't." Evelyn's brows furrowed. "I remember Caleb mentioning that loss once. Said it broke something in the unit." "It broke Weaver." Jonas looked up, his eyes sharper now. "He blamed me. Blamed Caleb. Said we left his brother behind and he never forgave it." He rubbed the stubble on his jaw, restless. "He's been off the grid for years. Rumors of survivalist camps, mercenary work, paranoia. A couple months back I heard whispers. Weaver was back in California. Then, 2 weeks ago, I saw him." Clara stiffened in her chair. "Where?" Jonas didn't answer her right away. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled envelope one with no return address. He slid it across the table to Evelyn. She opened it carefully. Inside, a photograph. Burned edges. It showed Clara and Ash at a local community event, the Harvest Parade. The back read, in blocky handwriting, "Not all legacies deserve to live." Evelyn's breath caught. Clara looked up at Jonas. "He sent this?" Jonas nodded. "He's not just angry anymore. He's focused. And I think he sees you, both of you, as Caleb's last thread, his legacy." Evelyn's voice turned cold. "You think he's planning to hurt my niece?" "I think," Jonas said carefully, "he's planning something bad. And Clara might be in the path. Not because of who she is, but because of who Caleb was." Ash rose quietly from his sit. Not barking, not growling, just standing, tense, alert, protective. His ears twitched at some frequency no one else could hear. Jonas looked down at the dog. "He knows. You see it, don't you, boy?" Clara's hand went to Ash's back. "He always knows before we do?" Jonas looked at Evelyn. I know I've lost every right to be in your life, but if Weaver comes closer, if he does anything, I need to help stop it. For Caleb, for Ash, for her. Evelyn said nothing. Her fingers trembled slightly against the photo. Jonas leaned forward, voice low. He's unstable, trained, armed, and he wants a reckoning. I can feel it. There was a beat of silence. The only sound was Ash's steady breathing. Then Clara spoke, barely above a whisper. We're not scared. Jonas gave a hollow smile. You should be. The hallway outside the interview room buzzed faintly with the usual background noise of a precinct, phones ringing, boots scuffing across tile, murmurs from officers rotating shifts. But then a new sound cracked through the atmosphere like a fault line giving way, the shrill ring of Captain Reyes's phone. He picked up quickly, expecting a routine update. Instead, his face drained of color mid-sentence. Yes? A pause. Where? Another pause. Confirm the name, Cal Morrison? He turned sharply toward the door. I need all units on standby. Possible hostage. Suspect believed to be ex-military, extremely unstable. Inside the room, Jonas froze as soon as Reyes re-entered, like a man who'd heard the pitch of something break inside him before the words came. Reyes didn't bother softening it. Jonas, Weaver's got Cal. Says he'll start sending pieces if we don't listen. The air snapped taut. Clara looked up in alarm. Cal? The man in the cafe? The one who gave me the peppermint candy? Jonas's jaw clenched. Yeah, he's family. Reyes nodded grimly. Caller used an encrypted burner, traced to an abandoned workshop near the tracks off Halberd Street. We're mobilizing now. Evelyn stepped in, already shielding Clara with her presence. What does he want? Reyes glanced at Jonas and then back to Evelyn. Says Jonas owes him blood, and that Caleb's girl will watch him pay. The words landed like a gut punch. Clara didn't flinch, but her hands found Ash's fur again. The dog hadn't moved, but his body language had changed, more alert, more locked in. His gaze was pointed to the door, as if he already sensed the direction of the threat. Jonas stood. I'm going. Reyes blinked. You're not police anymore. I don't care. Cal's in that building because of me. Weaver wants me, right? Then I go in first. You're a civilian, Jonas. I was a soldier before I was anything else, and I trained with Weaver. I know his rhythms. I know the terrain. Reyes looked torn. You understand if this goes sideways. I die knowing I tried to fix what I broke. Clara's voice cut through the rising noise. Then take Ash. Everyone turned. Jonas blinked. Clara. He protects the people my dad loved. That includes Cal. Her voice didn't shake. And you? Evelyn inhaled sharply, but said nothing. Not yet. Reyes weighed the insanity of it, then the logic. We send a team. You and Ash go in first, recon only. If there's no sign of Cal alive, we pull back, Jonas finished. I know. Clara looked up at Ash, her voice almost a whisper. Be careful. Ash responded with a soft nudge under her hand. Not a goodbye. Just I understand. Reyes snapped commands into his radio. Mobilize units Bravo and Delta. Dispatch a medical team on standby. This is now an active hostage rescue. As the team surged into motion, Jonas leaned down to Clara's chair. Whatever happens, he said softly, thank you for trusting me. Clara met his eyes, steady. Just bring them both back. And for the first time in years, Jonas Ward felt the weight of something heavier than guilt. Hope. The hum of engines outside the precinct rumbled low, like thunder waiting in its throat. Police vehicles lined up like dominoes under the silver morning sky. Tactical gear glinted under the lights. Officers clipped radios to their shoulders, checked weapons, reviewed maps. Inside the vehicle bay, Evelyn stood next to the unmarked SUV, arms crossed, jaw set like stone. Clara sat quietly in the back seat, hugging a small canvas bag that held Ash's spare harness, a picture of her dad, and one of the butterflies she'd drawn just yesterday. Jonas paced 3 steps away, speaking low, urgent. "I'm telling you, Evelyn Ash is the only one who can track him fast enough. Weaver's not just hiding, he's hunting. You've seen what Ash can do." Evelyn's eyes didn't soften. "He's not a weapon anymore. He's a therapy dog now, and Clara needs him." "She'll still have him just for a little while longer," Jonas pressed. "Ash doesn't forget his training, neither do I." Evelyn glanced at the team suiting up in the background, then at the long scar running down Jonas's forearm. "You want to take him back into that world? Risk losing him after everything?" "I don't want to," Jonas said, voice cracking. "But Cal doesn't have time. Weaver's unstable. This isn't a choice between comfort and chaos anymore. It's a choice between doing nothing and doing what Caleb would have done." That name hit harder than any argument. Clara reached forward from the back seat, voice steady and small. "Daddy would want Ash to help. He told me, Ash knows how to protect the people who need it most. That's what he said. Always." Evelyn turned, her composure fracturing. "Baby, you know if anything happens to him." "It won't," Clara said simply, "because Ash always comes back to me." Ash, who had been sitting beside the open door, gave a soft chuff-like punctuation on a truth already known. His eyes were locked on Jonas, posture attentive, tail still. Every fiber of his body said one thing: "I'm ready." Jonas crouched beside the dog and clipped on the old K9 harness. The leather was worn, the police dog patch faded from years of sun and battle. But the moment it clicked into place, Ash's demeanor shifted. Calm, focused, a soldier again. Evelyn inhaled sharply. "Clara stays in the SUV, under officer protection." "That's non-negotiable." Jonas nodded. "You have my word. And if anything happens to him," she added, softer now, "you better pray she never looks at you the way she did when her father didn't come home." Jonas looked her in the eye. "If I don't take him, she might never stop waiting." They stood in silence, the weight of every memory pressing down between them. Finally, Evelyn nodded once. Ash rose to his feet, and for the second time in his life, the German shepherd stepped toward a war he hadn't started, but would finish. The city breathed differently at dawn, slower, quieter, but no less tense. Streetlights blinked their final flickers before going dim. A soft haze hung in the air like the exhale of something holding its breath. Ash stood at the edge of an alleyway off Halberd Street, his nose hovering inches above a crumpled T-shirt held in a Ziploc bag. The cloth reeked old beer, grease, stale sweat, and something else sharp and metallic beneath the surface. Jonas unsealed the bag slowly, careful not to contaminate it further. "This is Weaver's," Officer Grant confirmed, checking his notes. "Stolen from the bar he was kicked out of last week." Jonas didn't need the backstory. The moment the scent hit Ash's nose, the dog's posture changed. Still, then precise. A deep, controlled inhale. Then a low, deliberate huff through the nostrils confirmation. Jonas gave a small nod. "Let's go." Ash moved like water, flowing forward with a practiced rhythm that only years of training could shape. No wasted steps, no noise. His paws touched down on gravel like falling dust. His eyes scanned ahead, ears pivoting in calculated intervals. From the SUV half a block away, Clara watched with fingers pressed to the glass. Her voice crackled through Jonas's earpiece, barely a whisper. "He's tilting left. That means there's a trail." Jonas smiled softly, astonished as always by how Clara had memorized Ash's signals. "You're right," he replied quietly. "He's in the zone." Ash wove through alleyways, tail held straight out like a compass needle. He paused near an overflowing dumpster, sniffed the bottom edge, then jerked his head once to the left. Behind them, tactical officers fanned out in pairs, keeping a 50-yard distance. Jonas followed alone. No leash, no command, just trust. Clara's voice again. His tail twitched once. "That's danger." Jonas stiffened. Then he saw it, too. Ash had stopped in front of a narrow brick building with boarded windows. A rusted fire escape hugged the back wall like a skeletal spine. The bottom rung swayed slightly in the wind. Ash lowered himself to a crouch. His gaze didn't leave the top landing. Jonas crouched beside him. "What do you smell, buddy?" Ash didn't move, didn't blink, but his lip curled barely. Jonas whispered into the radio. "Target possibly on the second floor. Fire escape's warm." Behind him, boots shuffled, radios clicked. Clara's voice came through one last time, barely audible. "Tell him to be careful." Jonas looked at the shepherd, who still hadn't moved. His body was a live wire, humming with silent electricity. "Clara says be careful," he murmured. Ash's ears flicked. Not an acknowledgement. More like an understanding. Then he took 3 steps toward the rusted ladder and stopped. His head turned sharply toward a basement door, half covered in vines. Jonas followed his line of sight. "Wait," he muttered. "It's not the fire escape." He crept closer, hand brushing the old metal doorknob. Ash didn't bark, didn't growl. He simply placed one paw forward and pressed it into the dirt-firm final. This was it. The door wasn't just an entrance, it was a warning. The basement door groaned open on rusted hinges, exhaling years of dust and mildew. Jonas led the way down the creaking wooden stairs, the beam of his flashlight cutting through cobwebs and shadow. Ash followed, his steps silent but purposeful, his body low, every muscle coiled, every sense alert. It was cold, damp, the kind of stillness that didn't feel like quiet. It felt like waiting. From above, the muffled static of radios and boots repositioning echoed faintly. Clara, safe in the SUV, held Ash's carved wooden figure in her lap like a prayer bead. Her lips moved, but no sound came, just hope. Jonas reached the bottom of the stairs and held his breath. The air shifted. Then he saw it. A bare bulb swung gently above an old mattress, and there, pressed up against the far wall, was Cal, bound with duct tape, mouth gagged, one eye swollen shut. Next to him stood a man, unshaven, twitching, eyes too wide to be sane. Weaver. He held a knife pressed against Cal's throat, but his focus was on Jonas. "Well, well," Weaver sneered. "Look who brought the mutt." Jonas raised both hands slowly. "You don't have to do this, Weaver. Let Cal go." Weaver laughed, a sound more cracked than amused. "Do you know what betrayal smells like, Jonas? It smells like dirt and diesel and blood. You left me there." Ash crept forward, 1 inch at a time, his breath silent, his eyes locked on the knife. Jonas glanced down just once, then nodded. It was enough. "You were unconscious." The whole unit pulled back. Caleb tried to come back for you." "Don't say his name," Weaver snapped, jabbing the blade harder against Cal's skin. "He died. And now I'm the ghost left to bury all of you." Ash stopped moving. No sound, no growl, just absolute stillness. And then, a flick of the wrist. Weaver pulled a second weapon from behind his coat, a pistol aimed not at Cal, but at Jonas. Everything happened at once. A single breath, a blur of fur and fury. Ash lunged. The gun fired. The sound shattered the silence. Jonas felt the rush of wind as the bullet tore the air between them, and then a sickening thud. Ash hit the ground mid-leap, his body twisting unnaturally, a sharp yelp echoing off the stone walls. Jonas dove forward, tackling Weaver, the pistol clattering across the floor. Cal cried out through the gag. Chaos erupted as officers stormed in behind them. But Jonas didn't hear the shouting, didn't feel the hands pulling him back. His eyes were on the German shepherd, motionless, chest heaving shallowly. "Ash, no, 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 no." Blood pooled beneath the canine's side. One leg kicked weakly. Jonas fell to his knees. "You did it, buddy. You saved us." His voice cracked. "Just stay with me." Officers restrained Weaver. Cal was pulled to safety, and Clara, watching through the SUV window from half a block away, saw the medics rush in with a stretcher for a dog. Her tiny voice reached the heavens. "Don't you dare leave me too." Ash didn't move, but his ear twitched just once toward the sound of her voice. The SUV door flew open before the engine even stopped. Clara's voice cracked the night. "Where is he? Where's Ash?" Jonas barely had time to speak. His hands were stained crimson, drying. The jacket he wore bore a ragged tear across the shoulder, but it was the weight in his eyes, not the blood, that made Evelyn's breath catch. "Where is he?" Clara demanded again, panic turning her usually soft tone into something sharp and brittle. Jonas tried to form words, but only managed, "They're working on him." The ambulance that carried Ash wasn't red. It was white, marked with a paw print and the words, "Emergency Vet Transport." But to Clara, it looked exactly like the one that had taken her parents away 2 years ago. She stared at it, paralyzed, until the stretcher came out. He was still, too still. Ash's coat, once clean and golden near the chest, was soaked in deep red. His vest had been cut open, straps dangling like torn memories. An oxygen mask covered his muzzle, fogging slightly with each fragile breath. "Please," Clara whispered, gripping the doorframe, "let me go with him." The EMT hesitated, then looked at Jonas. Jonas, pale and hunched from the fight, nodded once. "She's his family." They let her in. Inside the ambulance, Clara held on to the side rail as if she were bracing for the world to end. Ash didn't move, but when her hand touched the edge of the blanket, his paw flexed just slightly. "Enough." "I'm here," she said. "You're not alone. Just hang on, Ash." The vet hospital was quiet in that unnatural way emergency rooms are. Flashing lights, but no noise, movement without sound. Jonas sat in the corner of the waiting room, knees tapping, lips pressed together so tightly it looked like he might split from the inside. Evelyn stood behind Clara, hands on the girl's shoulders. They watched through the glass as Dr. Mason, a middle-aged man with gray curls poking from his surgical cap, reviewed scans with his assistant. Clara didn't blink. Dr. Mason finally stepped out. "It's bad," he said, no sugarcoating. "The bullet missed the heart by less than an inch, but it tore through muscle. He's lost a lot of blood." Clara stepped forward, trembling. "Can you fix him?" Dr. Mason knelt to her level. "We're going to try. He's strong. And I can tell he's fighting." "Because I told him to," she whispered. "He listens when it matters most." Mason's eyes softened. "Then he's got every reason to pull through." They wheeled Ash behind the steel doors. Evelyn guided Clara to the bench. Jonas sat across from them, staring at the dried blood crusted in the creases of his hands. "I should have seen it coming," he muttered. "You did," Evelyn replied quietly. "You just didn't see how far you'd go to stop it." He looked up, eyes burning. "That dog." He didn't hesitate. "No," Evelyn said. "Neither did you." Time slowed. Every second was a coin tossed in the air, life or death, on either side. But Clara kept her hand clenched around the carved wooden figure Jonas had made. She placed it on the bench beside her. "I gave him a promise," she said softly. "I told him I'd wait, just like he waited for me." Jonas exhaled shakily. "Then let's wait together." The clock on the wall refused to move. It had only been 30 minutes since Ash was wheeled into surgery, but for Clara, it felt like years. She sat curled in the oversized vinyl chair, her legs drawn up beneath her, arms wrapped around a stuffed bear whose seams were as frayed as her heart. Jonas sat across from her, nursing a bruised shoulder, his jacket stained with Ash's blood folded neatly on the chair beside him. A silence hung heavy in the air. Not uncomfortable, just dense, weighted with things unsaid. Evelyn hovered by the window, arms crossed, her gaze shifting between Clara's pale face and Jonas's haunted one. She hadn't spoken much since they arrived, not because she didn't have words, but because she had too many, and none of them were helpful. Finally, Clara broke the silence. "You knew my dad before I was born, didn't you?" Jonas looked up slowly. "Yeah. We met overseas, in a place so hot you couldn't touch metal without burning your skin. Caleb always said war was just a different kind of desert, one that dries up your soul if you let it." Clara blinked. "Was that where you met Ash, too?" A flicker of something passed through Jonas's eyes. A storm held back by force of will. He nodded. "Sort of. Your dad and I were on patrol. There was this collapsed building, a market, I think. After an explosion, we heard something whining in the rubble. A dog? A pup. Small, ears too big for his head. Trapped under twisted beams. Caleb crawled in to get him even while shots were still being fired, said he couldn't leave a life behind, no matter how small." Clara's eyes softened, her voice barely a whisper. "That was Ash?" "Yeah. Back then he wasn't trained. Just a shivering furball with eyes too old for his age, like he'd seen more than most people ever would. But your dad, he saw something in him. A survivor." Jonas shifted forward, elbows on his knees. "Caleb taught him everything. How to follow scent, how to stay calm under fire, how to trust." He looked down. "Ash didn't bark for the first 6 months, not once. But he never left your dad's side." A silence stretched again, this time gentler. Clara let the story settle like snowfall, soft, cold, real. "He used to write about you," she said. "In his letters. Said you were a good man. Just lost." Jonas swallowed hard. "I was. Still am, some days." She looked at him, really looked. "I think Ash remembers you, even if you forgot yourself." Evelyn's hand clenched the windowsill. She wasn't ready to trust Jonas. Not after the cafe, not after the past. But watching Clara now, listening so intently, her guarded face finally open, she saw something she couldn't ignore. Clara needed this. She needed the stories, the connection, the pieces of her father that lived on in the people and animals he'd touched. Evelyn sat down beside Clara, quiet, present, letting the moment breathe. Jonas cleared his throat. "There was this one time in Kabul," he began, voice low but steady. "Ash chased a car bomb driver through a maze of alleys. Caleb was right behind him. They brought him down before it could reach the checkpoint." "Did they get hurt?" "Just scrapes. But your dad told Ash, 'That's one more day we all get to live.' That night he let Ash sleep in his bunk." Clara smiled faintly. "He never let dogs on the bed here." Jonas chuckled, the sound surprised out of him. "Trust me, he did over there. Even snuck food from his tray." Clara leaned her head against Evelyn's shoulder, eyes fluttering with fatigue. But before they closed, she murmured, "Thank you for telling me." Jonas looked down at the floor, his voice just above a whisper. "He'd want you to know." And in that quiet corner of the waiting room, under fluorescent lights and ticking clocks, 3 lives once fractured began stitching themselves back together. Not through apology, through memory. The light above the operating room door flicked from red to green. Clara jerked awake from where she'd dozed off in Evelyn's lap. Jonas stood instantly, his hands clenched so tight the knuckles blanched white. Dr. Mason emerged, her scrubs streaked with crimson and iodine, her face pale with the weight of what she'd just done. She removed her cap slowly, too slowly. Clara gripped Evelyn's hand. "Is he—" Dr. Mason knelt so her eyes were level with Clara's. "He made it. He lost a lot of blood, but his vitals are steady. The bullet fractured his shoulder, grazed his lung, but it didn't go all the way through. He's strong." Clara didn't breathe for 3 full seconds. Then she crumpled into Evelyn's arms, sobbing. The kind of sound no adult could fake. A sound that peeled back every layer of composure and exposed only love, raw and absolute. Jonas sat down slowly, covering his face with his hands. The air felt heavy with unspoken prayers, granted barely. "He's not out of the woods," Dr. Mason added gently. "The next 48 hours are critical, and if he pulls through, it'll be 8 to 12 weeks of strict recovery. No work, no stairs, no stress." Clara looked up, her cheeks blotchy and wet. "But I need him to live." Jonas turned to her, voice steady but low. "Then I'll help him get there." Dr. Mason stood. "You can see him for a few minutes. He's sedated, but he'll know you're there." They walked single file into the sterile room, where Ash lay under a thermal blanket hooked up to IVs, his chest rising in slow, even breaths. His bandaged side rose and fell like the rhythm of a battered but surviving drum. Clara stepped forward first. She didn't touch him, just crouched by his side and whispered, "You kept your promise." Jonas hung back, but Ash stirred. One ear twitched. He knew. Jonas placed his hand gently on the edge of the table. "You remember me, don't you, buddy? You always did." Evelyn watched from the doorway, her arms folded but her heart softening. She could see now this wasn't just a dog. This wasn't just an old friend. This was Clara's anchor, her history, her hope, and maybe Jonas's, too. Clara sat down on the stool beside Ash, resting her hand near his paw. "They said you'd need help getting better, but you helped me first. So now, it's my turn." Jonas knelt beside her. "We'll take it one day at a time. No rushing, no orders, just healing." She nodded, her eyes never leaving Ash's face. Dr. Mason returned a moment later. "We need to let him rest now." They said their goodbyes quietly, gently. As they left the room, Clara looked over her shoulder. I told him he'd come back. And he did. Jonas glanced at her, then at Evelyn. You're his mission now, he said. Evelyn didn't correct him, because he was right. The first morning began with silence, not the kind that follows sleep, but the heavy kind where each movement feels like a trespass. The sun crept through the linen curtains, soft gold dappling the hardwood floor like a quiet invitation. In the corner of the living room, Ash lay still on his padded recovery mat, bandages visible beneath his fur. He didn't lift his head. He didn't need to. He was watching. From the hallway, Jonas emerged carrying a steaming mug of chamomile tea in one hand and Clara's breakfast tray balanced in the other. The toast was slightly overdone. The eggs were uneven. But he'd tried. Evelyn leaned on the doorway, her expression neutral, arms folded, not disapproving, but not warm either. She said nothing as Jonas passed, only nodded slightly. Clara sat propped up in her seat near the window, her lap covered in a light blanket. She was already dressed. Evelyn must have helped her, but her hair was half-brushed and her socks were mismatched. She stared out at the garden, cradling a small plush butterfly in her hands. I brought breakfast, Jonas said, voice gentle, unsure. I tried not to burn it. Can't promise anything. Clara didn't look at him right away, but she didn't tell him to leave either. He set the tray down in front of her. The tea wobbled slightly, but didn't spill. You used to have toast triangles with your dad, Jonas said softly, sitting across from her. He told me. Said it was your thing. Clara glanced at the plate. The toast had been cut diagonally. One edge was darker than the other. Still, she picked up a piece and took a small bite. It's okay, she said, not smiling, but not frowning either. From the corner, Ash gave a low exhale. Jonas turned to him and gave a mock salute. We're holding the line, pal. Ash blinked slowly, half approval, half watchfulness. Later that morning, Jonas followed Ash's old schedule like a blueprint. He helped Clara with her stretches, gently rotating her ankle braces, adjusting the lap belt on her chair. When she reached for her water, he was already there, holding the straw. You don't have to, she said. I know, he answered. But I want to. By mid-morning, Evelyn had gone to the pharmacy, leaving them alone. Jonas found Clara in the living room, trying to pick up a book that had fallen beside the couch. He moved to help, but she raised a hand. I got it. He froze, waited, watched her stretch down, fingers grasping the edge of the hardcover. She got it. He smiled. Good reach. A pause. Then Clara asked, Did you always call him Pal? Yeah, Jonas said, settling onto the edge of the armchair. Since he was a puppy. Caleb used to laugh at me for it. Said I sounded like an old cowboy. Clara tilted her head, her expression softening for the first time in days. I like it, she said. Across the room, Ash adjusted his position with effort. His body still weak, but his eyes sharp. He followed every movement, every word. That afternoon, Jonas carried Ash outside into the backyard. The vet had cleared short, supervised walks, though really, they were more like standing breaks. Ash stood on 3 legs, the 4th wrapped in layers of gauze. Jonas didn't push. Just let the dog sniff the air, feel the breeze again. Clara watched from the deck, sketchbook in her lap. She wasn't drawing butterflies today. She was sketching Jonas, awkward, bearded, still wearing the same black boots he always had. But in the background of the sketch, she added Ash, tall, alert, stronger than he was now. Hope in pencil form. That night, Evelyn passed by the guest room and saw Jonas placing a photo of Caleb on the nightstand next to a half-unpacked duffel and an old military coin. He sat on the edge of the bed, hands on his knees, breathing like he was trying to slow time. She stood there for a second, then walked away. Down the hall, Clara whispered into the dim, "He's trying, Ash. I think he misses Daddy, too." Ash didn't move, but his ears lifted ever so slightly, and Clara, for the first time in days, closed her eyes without crying. The clinic smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender lotion, the kind the receptionist always kept near the front desk. Morning sunlight spilled through the high windows, diffused by frosted glass, casting soft shadows onto the therapy mats. Clara sat in her wheelchair, legs secured with gentle straps, brows furrowed as she concentrated on a resistance band exercise. Her hands trembled slightly, not from pain, but from the effort of pushing forward inch by inch. Jonas knelt beside her, steadying the base of the band where it hooked onto the footplate. "Try again," he said quietly, voice low and calm. "You've got it." "I had it," Clara muttered, frustration tugging at the edges of her tone. He gave a half-smile. "Then we'll get it back." Ash, still on restricted movement, sat nearby in his padded harness, his leash gently looped around a table leg. His gaze never left Clara, not once in the last 30 minutes. When she finally completed the full extension, Jonas raised his fist. "Boom! That's what I'm talking about." Clara rolled her eyes but grinned. A real one. The kind that reached her eyes again. Later, in the parking lot, Jonas opened the back of Evelyn's SUV and wrestled with the older lift system attached to the bumper. The hydraulic arm had been sticking again. A hiss, a creak, and then nothing. He stepped back, rubbed his neck, and muttered something under his breath. "You're cursing at it again," Clara said from behind. Jonas chuckled, defeated. "In 3 languages, no less. You know I can help, right?" "I know," he said, "but I want to figure it out. For you." Together they watched as a small bead of oil dripped from the piston. Jonas sighed. Ash gave a soft chuff from inside as if to say, "You're losing, man." That night something shattered. Clara had gotten up for a glass of water when she heard it. A strangled sound muffled by a closed door. Not quite a scream, not a cry either. Just raw. Jonas's door. She paused at the hallway corner, unsure. Ash was already sitting up on his mat, ears perked. His body stiffened, as if waiting for a command he couldn't hear. Then another sound, a gasping breath, something hitting the floor. Clara crept forward, her socked feet silent on the tile. Through the barely cracked door, she saw Jonas curled on the edge of the mattress, drenched in sweat, back heaving with every breath. The lamp was still on, casting long shadows across the room. His face was a storm of memory, eyes wide, pupils lost somewhere that wasn't here. "No, Caleb, get down," he choked, and then silence. Ash stood in the doorway now, unmoving, guarding. Clara didn't step in. She didn't speak. She just looked and understood. The next morning, a folded piece of paper sat beside Jonas's coffee cup. He blinked at it, groggy and guilt-laced, as if the world was still reassembling itself after the night before. He opened it. Inside was a drawing hand done, colored in soft pencil strokes. It was him. Not as he was, but how Clara saw him, sitting between her and Ash, arms around both. Safe, strong, whole. At the bottom, in neat lettering, She'd written, "You're not bad. You're just scared. But we still want you." Jonas set the picture down like it was something fragile. Then, without warning, he wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his hoodie. Across the room, Clara pretended not to notice. But when Jonas walked past her to refill her cereal bowl, he gently placed his hand on her shoulder. Just for a second. Ash's tail thumped once, then again. And that was enough. The sound of carving was soft but steady like a heartbeat in wood. Out in the garage, lit by a single hanging bulb and the golden wash of the setting sun, Jonas sat hunched over an old workbench. A block of oak rested between his calloused hands, its edges slowly giving way beneath the gentle pressure of the whittling knife. The air smelled of cedar shavings, dust, and the faint citrus cleaner Evelyn had used earlier in the day. A battered radio hummed lowly in the background, playing some bluesy instrumental that matched the mood, wordless but heavy with meaning. He worked slowly, carefully. The figure wasn't perfect, not by a long shot. One ear sat slightly higher than the other, and the paws were clunky in places. But there was something honest in the shape, something unmistakable. The stance was alert, head tilted slightly, chest proud, just like Ash. He paused once, running his thumb along the carved back, then over the etched eyes. He had taken his time there, digging deeper with a fine blade, trying to capture that look Ash always gave Clara. Protective, yes, but more than that present, like he was listening to something even the wind couldn't hear. Later, just after dinner, Jonas stood outside Clara's room, the little sculpture tucked behind his back. Inside, she sat curled in a blanket on her bed, a sketch pad in her lap. Ash lay at her feet, still on limited movement, a soft bandage wrapped around his hind leg. He lifted his head when Jonas entered, tail wagging once in acknowledgement. "You okay with visitors?" Jonas asked. Clara nodded without looking up. "Depends. Do they bring chocolate?" "Not today," Jonas smirked, "but I brought something better." He stepped in, crouched beside the bed, and held out the wooden figure. Clara's eyes widened. "Is that—" "It's him," Jonas said. "Well, a version of him. The oaks from the backyard. I figured if he can't be everywhere right now, maybe this can." Clara took it with both hands, turning the carving over slowly. Her fingers traced the grooves where the fur had been suggested, the little collar line, the slight bend in one front leg. Ash gave a low chuff from the floor, as if giving his approval. "I know it's not perfect," Jonas began, but she cut him off. "It is," she said softly. "It's perfect." A long beat passed. Then, without a word, she leaned over and placed the wooden ash on her nightstand, right beside her water glass and an old photo of her dad. Jonas watched her for a moment longer. "Until the real one's back on his feet," he said finally, voice just above a whisper. Clara smiled. It wasn't wide or dramatic, but it was full of warmth, full of understanding. Then she reached for her sketch pad, flipped to a blank page, and began to draw again. This time it wasn't butterflies. It wasn't memories. It was the little wooden Ash, standing beside a little wooden girl, both looking forward. It was too late for conversations that felt this heavy. The moon hung low over the backyard, casting long shadows through the slats of the weathered fence. Inside, the house had gone quiet. Clara was asleep, one arm curled protectively around the wooden Ash figure. The real Ash lay at the foot of her bed, breathing deep, steady, finally at rest. Evelyn stood in the kitchen, the refrigerator door still open. But she wasn't reaching for anything. Her hand gripped the edge of the door, knuckles white, as if bracing herself. Jonas sat at the table behind her, sipping tea he hadn't touched since it cooled. He knew it was coming. "You broke something in her that day," Evelyn said, voice barely above a whisper. She didn't turn around, just stared into the dim glow of the fridge, her words fogging slightly in the cold air. Jonas swallowed hard. "I know." "No," she said, shutting the fridge softly. "I don't think you do." She faced him now. Her eyes, usually kind, carried a steel edge tempered by years of holding things together, of burying her own pain so Clara never had to see it. "She used to believe the world was mostly good," Evelyn said, crossing her arms. "That people, even broken ones, would try to be better. But after that day at the cafe, she didn't draw for a week, didn't sleep for 3. Ash wouldn't leave her side." Jonas lowered his gaze. "I was losing it," he said, voice rough. "Everything just came at me sideways. Seeing her, seeing him, it brought back things I thought I'd buried." "You were a storm," Evelyn said, cutting through his words. "And she was just a girl sitting in the calm." Silence. Just the hum of the kitchen clock ticking too loud in a room full of everything unsaid. Jonas looked up slowly, his hands clasped between his knees. "I wasn't planning to live past that weekend," he said. Evelyn blinked. "I'd made up my mind," Jonas continued, his voice distant. "Spent the whole drive here thinking about where to do it. Then I saw Ash. I saw her. And something cracked open." Evelyn moved to the sink, gripping the edge. "She looks like Caleb," Jonas said quietly. "Not just the face, the way she reads people, the stillness in her. I saw him again, just for a second, and I couldn't go through with it." He stood now, slow and deliberate. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I probably don't deserve it. But I swear to you, I will never be that storm again. Not to her. Not to anyone." Evelyn turned, really looking at him this time, not as the man who once shattered their sense of peace, but as the man trying to rebuild something he never thought he'd hold again. "I'm not ready to forgive you," she said, "but she's choosing to let you stay. That has to mean something." Jonas nodded. "I'm not going anywhere," he promised. Evelyn sighed and walked past him. But before she disappeared down the hall, she paused. "She told me once," Evelyn said over her shoulder, "that Ash doesn't protect everyone. Just the ones he knows are good." She didn't wait for a reply. And in the hush that followed, Jonas finally exhaled for the first time all day. The morning light spilled gently through the kitchen window, casting soft golden lines across the floor. It was one of those quiet mornings where the world felt like it was holding its breath. No rush, no sirens, just the hum of an old kettle and the slow creak of wooden floorboards. Clara sat at the table, legs swinging, a chipped mug of warm cocoa cupped in both hands. Her hair was still messy from sleep, her pajama sleeves pushed halfway up her arms. Ash lay at her feet, eyes half-lidded but alert, always. Jonas moved quietly, placing 2 slices of toast on her plate. "You buttered the crust," Clara said, glancing up. Jonas stiffened, caught. "I saw Evelyn do it once." "Said you don't like it dry at the edge?" Clara didn't smile, but she didn't frown either. For a moment it was just the sound of spreading jam. A red smear, sweet and slightly uneven like everything in their lives lately. Then she spoke. "I knew you weren't a stranger." Jonas paused, halfway to sitting down. She looked at him now, not like a child unsure of the world, but like someone who'd quietly been carrying a piece of it all along. "My dad wrote about you," she said, "in the letters he left." Jonas sat, slow. "He did?" Clara nodded. Her fingers curled around the mug like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "Not a lot, just pieces. He said there was a man who used to laugh loud and train even louder. Said you two found Ash when he was still just bones and shaking fur." Jonas swallowed. "He said you'd come back," Clara added softly, "when the time was right." A breath caught in Jonas's throat. He looked at her, not as the girl he'd almost scared away, but as the last link to the man who once saved his life and believed he could still be worth something. "I thought I ruined everything," Jonas whispered. "That day at the cafe, I was scared," Clara admitted. "Ash was too, but scared isn't the same as gone." She glanced down at the dog. "He still trusted you, even when you were loud, even when your hands moved too fast." Jonas blinked, overcome by the weight of such quiet wisdom. "Why didn't you say anything before?" he asked. Clara shrugged. "Because people don't always stay. And if you were going to leave, I didn't want to miss you twice." That line, so soft, so simple, rattled something loose in Jonas's chest. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Clara, I'm not leaving. Not unless your grandma throws me out or Ash decides I'm unworthy." Ash grunted, half asleep but seemingly in approval. Clara smiled for the first time that morning. "Good," she said, "because I think Daddy would have wanted me to give you a second chance." Jonas nodded, eyes misting. "And I think he'd be proud of you. For everything." She didn't respond with words, just reached into her pocket and unfolded a wrinkled drawing, a simple sketch of a butterfly and a dog sitting beneath a tree. "He said you once told him that healing takes time, that broken people still belong somewhere." Jonas touched the edge of the paper with one calloused finger. "He never stopped believing that, even when I did." They sat there in silence, but it wasn't awkward. It was full, like a field after rain still quiet, but ready to bloom again. Outside, a breeze rustled the chimes by the porch. Ash sighed deeply, shifting closer to Clara's feet. The moment didn't need fixing. It just needed to be felt. And for the first time in a long while, Jonas didn't feel like a shadow in someone else's story. He felt like he'd been written in, long before he ever arrived. The morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains, spilling soft light onto the living room floor where a row of paw prints had once marked each moment of Clara's days before silence had taken over. Now, everything waited, as if even time itself was holding its breath. Ash lay on the recovery mat, his breathing calm but alert. His eyes, those deep, steady amber eyes, watched every movement around him. For weeks he had only shifted when necessary, each motion slow, deliberate, protective of the wound that had nearly stolen him away. But today was different. Today Jonas stood nearby holding a makeshift harness stitched with love and reinforced by borrowed faith. Clara sat on the couch, back ramrod straight, her small fingers clenched around the wooden carving Jonas had given her weeks before, the tiny version of the dog who now slowly tried to rise. Ash grunted, his front legs stretching forward. Muscles quivered, nails scraped the mat. Jonas crouched beside him, eyes steady but heart racing. "Easy, buddy," he said gently. "No one's timing you." Ash lifted himself part way, then paused, as if listening to something only he could hear. Then, with a deep exhale, he pushed. Clara gasped. One paw, then the other. Ash stood, shaky, unsure, but standing. Jonas instinctively moved the harness beneath Ash's torso, giving him just enough support without taking away the effort. "That's it," he whispered. "You're doing it." Ash took a step. His body swayed. Clara leaned forward. Another step, then another. It wasn't fast. It wasn't graceful. But it was his. By the time Ash reached the middle of the room, Jonas was crying quietly, like a man who had seen miracles before and still couldn't believe he was allowed another. Clara's voice was barely audible over the rush of emotion that filled the room. "I told you," she whispered. "He always comes back to me." Jonas turned toward her. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them. She didn't need to. There was no shame in this kind of crying, only gratitude. Ash stopped near the coffee table, tail twitching once in recognition. Then he looked back at her. Clara smiled through her tears. "Hi, best boy," she said. Ash let out a soft huff, part sigh, part reply. Evelyn stood just beyond the doorway, hand pressed to her mouth, her own eyes misty. And in that one room, scarred by grief, held together by hope, something shifted. Not everything was healed. Not everything was whole. But the hardest step had just been taken. And the rest, like all good stories, would come one step at a time. The wind carried a softness that afternoon, one that made even the trees in Glendale Park sway as if they understood the weight of the day. A white canopy had been set up near the memorial stone, its edges rippling in the breeze. Rows of folding chairs lined the grass, filled with neighbors, police officers, veterans, and those who simply came to bear witness. It wasn't a parade. It wasn't televised. But for those present, it was sacred. Jonas adjusted the collar of his clean but weathered jacket. The scars on his knuckles were still visible marks not just of war, but of years spent holding too much grief with too few hands. Today, though, his hands weren't shaking. Beside him stood Clara in her pressed navy dress, wheelchair handles decorated with tiny paper butterflies she'd made that morning. Evelyn sat a row back, letting the moment belong to them. And in front of everyone, resting on all fours, again steady, proud, breathing the hero himself. Ash. His fur had grown back where it had been shaved for surgery, a patch of white still visible where the scar sliced near his ribs. A silver K9 harness was buckled over his back, not for duty, but for dignity. Captain Reyes stepped forward, his voice calm through the speaker. "Some heroes wear uniforms. Others don't need one to remind us who they are." There were murmurs of agreement. A few officers removed their caps. Reyes continued, "Today we honor a life saved, and the one who risked his own to do it. K9 Ash, retired but never replaced, is receiving this medal not as an officer but as a guardian." He turned toward Clara. "And we'd like someone very special to do the honors." Clara wheeled herself forward. Jonas knelt beside Ash, holding the base of the ribbon as Clara leaned in. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her eyes, wide and full of something far older than her years, did not waver. She pinned the medal to Ash's harness, a polished circle engraved with words that shimmered in the afternoon light. "For valor beyond duty," Clara whispered, just loud enough for the microphone to catch. "For being my legs when I couldn't walk, and my heart when I was too scared to feel." Ash looked up at her then, as if understanding every syllable. The crowd stood. Applause swelled, not thunderous, but deep, respectful, the kind of applause meant not for spectacle, but for survival. Tears streaked down Jonas's face before he could stop them. He looked at Ash, then Clara, then out toward the crowd, and saw not judgment, not pity, but recognition. From people who understood what it meant to carry pain and to keep walking anyway. Clara placed her hand gently on Ash's head. "He's not just brave," she said to the gathered crowd. "He's home." And in that moment, nothing more needed to be said. The patio behind Maple and Oak Cafe had never looked so full. Fairy lights hung across the pergola, flickering gently in the dusk like fireflies that had decided to stay for dinner. Picnic tables were rearranged into a long communal stretch, covered in mismatched plates, napkins, and pots of Evelyn's lemon rosemary chicken. Laughter moved through the crowd like wind chimes on a warm night. But beneath the joy was something deeper, a quiet understanding that none of them, would be here if not for the journey they'd just survived. Clara sat between Jonas and Cal, her feet swinging gently under the bench. She was grinning at something Officer Davis had just said, something about how Ash should be given a badge and his own booth at the cafe. Evelyn wiped her hands on her apron and leaned against the doorframe, watching the scene before her with a kind of disbelief. For so long, her world had been measured by grief, by what was missing. But tonight, every empty place had been filled. The table was surrounded by the people who had stayed, people who had chosen to show up not out of duty, but out of love. Jonas stood off to the side, adjusting Ash's new harness. The vest had been specially redesigned lighter, softer, with canine companion stitched across the back instead of the old police insignia. A butterfly pin, made by Clara, was sewn just above the heart. Ash sat patiently as Jonas knelt beside him. His eyes were calm now, no longer scanning for threats. For the first time in a long while, Ash looked at peace. "All right, old friend," Jonas said softly, buckling the last strap. "No more patrols, no more commands, just home, just her." Clara wheeled over and ran her fingers along the edge of the vest. "Do you think he knows?" she asked. Jonas looked at her. "Knows what?" "That he still matters, even if he's not working anymore." Jonas swallowed hard. "Yeah," he said, "I think he knows, because you never stopped showing him." Clara smiled and reached out to hug Ash's neck. He leaned into it, tail thumping once against the wooden deck. Cal clinked his glass, drawing the crowd's attention. "I'd like to make a toast," he said, standing tall with a paper plate in one hand and a root beer in the other. "To those who didn't walk away, to the ones who stood between the storm and the people they loved, and to the family you don't always expect but always need." "To family!" the crowd echoed, lifting cups and glasses. Evelyn raised hers, too, catching Jonas's eye from across the patio. For the first time, she didn't look guarded. She looked settled. Jonas nodded, barely perceptible, but she saw it. A silent agreement that whatever came next, they'd face it the way this family was built, one act of courage at a time. And as the sky faded from gold to indigo, and Ash curled beneath Clara's chair, the only thing louder than the laughter was the quiet knowledge that every broken piece had found its place again. Together, the house had quieted after the gathering, dishes washed, lights dimmed. Clara had fallen asleep on the couch, her head resting on Ash's flank, his breathing slow and deep beneath her fingers. A final ember of the day still glowed faintly in the fireplace. Jonas sat alone at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of black coffee gone cold hours ago. He didn't hear Evelyn approach, just felt the shift in air, the soft creak of floorboards. "I found something," she said gently, setting a small, worn envelope on the table beside him. The handwriting was unmistakable, firm, slanted, a little rushed-like. Every word had been pulled from someone who didn't have the time to say it all. Jonas didn't move at first. He stared at the name written across the front. Jonas Ward. "To be delivered only if I don't come home. Caleb." His breath caught. Something tightened in his chest, ancient and raw. Evelyn sat across from him but said nothing more. Just waited. Present, but silent. The kind of silence that gives permission. With a trembling thumb, Jonas opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, creased 3 ways and faded around the edges. It smelled faintly of sand and motor oil. Afghanistan. The letter began without preamble, like Caleb had started mid-thought. "Jonas, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it back. And that breaks my damn heart. Not because of what happens to me, but because I won't be there to raise my little girl. You know what she means to me. She's light in a place I didn't think had any left. And I don't get to choose much now, but if I did, if I could trust one person with her future, it would be you. I know we haven't talked since Weaver. I know I should have called, written, anything. But I figured, maybe someday, maybe when the ghosts got quieter. If that day ever comes, and she's still small, and you've still got something left in you, I'm asking, be there for her. Not because you owe me, but because I think she might be the one thing that can save you too. Ash, he's not just a dog. You and I both know that. He's got the kind of soul that finds the broken and stays until they're not anymore. You and him, you're the only two I'd trust to find her again. Caleb. Jonas didn't realize he was crying until the ink blurred. Silent tears, no sobs, no shaking, just a quiet undoing of years of armor. His hand gripped the paper like it might slip away. "I should have written back," he whispered, voice hoarse. Evelyn reached across the table, her hand resting gently over his. "You're here now." He nodded. Barely. Outside, the wind stirred the wind chimes on the porch. They rang soft and steady, like the voice of someone long gone, but never really absent. And Jonas, for the first time in years, let it all in. Not just the grief, but the grace. Maple and oak hadn't changed much. The same bronze chimes above the door gave their soft, familiar greeting as Jonas held it open for Clara's wheelchair. Evelyn followed, and Ash padded in, last his gait, still cautious, but firm, purposeful. The once veteran canine no longer wore the tactical vest that had borne scars of war and heroism. Today he wore something simpler. A deep navy blue cloth with a single patch stitched across the side. Still on duty, just different now. The morning crowd fell into hush as they entered. Barista Alondra blinked, holding a ceramic mug mid-pour. Mason, who once grumbled about paw prints on clean floors, stood frozen, then smiled. A couple at the corner table put their phones down. Even the espresso machine seemed to take a moment of silence. Then came the quiet applause. Not loud, not for spectacle. Just enough to say, "We see you." Ash didn't react with a bark or tail wag. He simply walked forward with that slow, grounded dignity of a dog who had been through fire and returned without asking for medals. He made his way to the corner near the window, the same spot he'd guarded for months. The place where he'd once laid beside Clara's chair as she laughed over whipped cream and cocoa. And with a soft sigh, he sat right where he used to, like nothing had ever gone wrong. Clara's smile bloomed slowly. "That's his table," she whispered. Jonas nodded. "Always was." Ash looked toward them, not with the alertness of a soldier, but the presence of a guardian who knew his job wasn't finished, just evolved. The staff resumed their routines, though eyes kept drifting back. Evelyn stepped up to the counter, ordered the usual, then hesitated. "I didn't think we'd come back here," she murmured to Alondra. "Some places don't forget," Alondra replied softly. "They wait." Jonas helped Clara adjust her seat near Ash. She reached down, ran her fingers through the soft fur just behind his ears. Ash leaned into it, eyes half closing. Outside, the wind played through the oak leaves. Inside, a new peace settled in, earned, fragile, and beautifully ordinary. The sun filtered through the backyard trees in golden strands, warming the patch of grass where Clara sat cross-legged beside Ash. Her laughter rose like wind chimes, light, clean, unhindered. Jonas knelt across from her, a slice of hot dog pinched between two fingers. "All right," he grinned. "Let's try this one more time. Command?" Clara inhaled, then called out clearly, "Ash, heel!" Ash didn't move. He looked at Jonas, then at Clara, then flopped lazily to one side. Jonas laughed. "He's testing you. Try again. Same tone, but mean it." Clara sat up straighter, mimicking Jonas's posture, and tried again firmer. "Ash, heel!" Ash groaned, and then, with the most theatrical sigh a dog could manage, stood up and trotted obediently to her left side. Clara lit up. "He remembered. I did it." "Of course you did," Jonas said, ruffling her hair. "But let's pretend we're teaching him again just in case he forgets." She gave him a knowing look. "He doesn't forget." "No," Jonas said quietly. "He just waits for the right voice." From the porch, Evelyn stood with a warm mug in her hands, watching the two of them like someone who'd been holding their breath for too long and could finally exhale. The way Clara laughed again, not the cautious, polite laugh of before, but something fuller, something rooted, real. Jonas shifted into the next command. "Ash, sit pretty." The German shepherd cocked his head, then awkwardly lifted his front paws off the ground for a second before toppling sideways into Clara's lap. She shrieked with laughter. "That's not pretty!" "I think he disagrees," Jonas said with a smirk. Clara buried her face in Ash's fur, still giggling. "He's perfect." Jonas nodded, voice softer now. "Yeah, he is." The moment was small, easy to miss in its simplicity. But in that patch of backyard, beneath the shade of trees that had stood through storms and still stayed upright, something invisible clicked back into place. Ash, Jonas, Clara, full circle. And Evelyn, standing just out of sight, whispered to herself, "Thank you, Caleb." The house had gone quiet. Not the kind of quiet that pressed down like grief, but the kind that wrapped around you like a blanket on a chilly night. Gentle, earned. Inside, Clara slept soundly, one hand draped over the edge of her bed, fingers curled in Ash's fur. The big shepherd lay on the rug beside her, eyes closed, ears still twitching at every creak of the old floorboards. His body no longer bore the bandages, but the fur hadn't fully grown back where the bullet had grazed his side. Still, he was whole. And Clara? More than whole. She was glowing from the inside out, like a lantern rekindled. Out on the porch, Jonas sat in the creaking chair Caleb used to favor. The late breeze lifted the scent of cut grass and old wood. In his lap rested the letter Evelyn had given him. the one Caleb never got to send. If I'm gone, protect my girl. Jonas's fingers tightened slightly around the worn page. The ink had faded in places, but not the intent. The words hit harder now than they did in the police station. Harder because Clara had let him in. Harder because Caleb was no longer just a fallen comrade. He was a brother, and that little girl was a piece of him still breathing in the world. The screen door creaked. Evelyn stepped out, wrapped in her worn cardigan. She didn't speak right away, just walked over, looked out at the stars for a while. Then, in a voice low and steady, she said, "You kept your promise." Jonas looked down at the letter, then back toward the window where Clara slept. "I didn't think I could," he admitted. "You didn't have to be perfect," Evelyn replied. "You just had to show up." He swallowed hard, eyes burning. "She saved me too, you know, not just Ash." Evelyn nodded. "I know." Ash padded softly onto the porch, laying between them like a sentinel returned from war. Jonas leaned forward, hand resting gently on the shepherd's broad neck. They sat in silence for a while, 3 lives shaped by loss, held together by the most unexpected of threads, a promise, a child, and a dog who never forgot how to come home. Some families aren't born, they're built, and sometimes the strongest ones begin in the aftermath of broken things. In the quiet moments between chaos and healing, some bonds are born not out of blood, but out of loyalty, memory, and silent promises. This is the story of Clara, Jonas, an Asha girl who refused to stop believing, a man who found redemption through love, and a German shepherd who never gave up his duty. German shepherds are more than just working dogs. They are protectors, healers, silent companions, who feel our pain before we speak it. Ash didn't just save lives, he stitched broken pieces back together, reminded a child she wasn't alone, and gave a grieving soldier the courage to start over. This story reminds us that love has many forms. Sometimes it's a worn-out vest, a hand reaching out in the dark, or a dog resting quietly beside a bed. If we learn anything from Ash, it's this: true loyalty doesn't retire. It adapts. It endures. May we all be a little more like him, brave when it matters, gentle when it counts, and unwavering in love. And may we never forget, animals don't just walk beside us. Sometimes they lead us home.